At Tumbleweed, we always recommend that you hire an expert for areas that you're not comfortable with. For example, Chuck here is with RV Incorporated, and he is an RV maintenance specialist. And because this is a tiny home, it's very similar to an RV. And in fact, Chuck, don't we have RV hookups for this particular unit?
Yes, we do. What we're doing is an application the same way you would in an RV.
So, for example, with your sewer line, you've already drilled your hole for your waste line for the toilet.
Yes.
And what would this look like then underneath the trailer?
Underneath the trailer, what we'll have is this flange here that will sit down onto the floor.
Once we're ready to install it, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be the rough end. Because we have a metal deck at the bottom of this trailer, what I am going to do is sleeve this hole through the metal deck and then run my pipe through that sleeve so it won't come in contact with the metal below and rub and
Potentially cause a nasty leak.
A nasty leak. What we got here is your main part of your sewer system. And this is going to be able to let your trailer drain the gray water and the black water out of your house. This is going to hook up to your toilet, and we have what we call a gate valve. And this gate valve is going to prevent your black water from going in and out of your drain whenever you're not using it. You open it when you want to use it. You will come through. You're going to catch your gray waters, which will flow constantly. So if you're using a biodegradable soap or any detergent like that, you could actually use this bottom valve and hook your garden hose to it and water your flowers, water your vegetables. And this is what they call an extension. This will all mount to the side of the trailer so you're not crawling under your trailer to shut and open and shut your valve. And that's about it. We're going to get ready to install it and get her hooked up and get her ready to flow.
The mechanical systems in your tiny house are going to be determined by how you intend on heating your water, delivering heat to the internal environment, getting your water in and out, and your sewage. Also, how you're going to distribute your electricity through the system and what type of voltages you need. In this house, all of the mechanicals were combined into one area. That's important because it saves space, it's more efficient, and it's going to make the installation much easier. Benny, can you show us the components in this system?
I sure can. So the first thing that we have here that's very important is this is the space where the refrigerator will come into. So with the refrigerator being out, everything is accessible to get the components in, and also if any service work needs to be done down the road, you can pull the fridge out and everything to the side is accessible here. So what you can see down here is we have a water tank here, and it works as two ways. We have the fill here, and with this pipe here, you can actually fill your tank with a bucket or with gallon jugs from the outside. And then we also have the direct feed, which you could hook a garden hose up to it and have a direct feed and feed your system as well, like that. This is the on-demand water heater, and then the pump comes right in beside it, and then we have the breaker panel with all the electrical and the 12 volt combined into one box. So everything's nice and it's tucked together, nice and neat here takes up very little space, and everything is accessible with the fridge gone.
What we got here is a nice compact design. We've got a freshwater tank below us, your 12-volt converter, which is 110 12-volt, a 12-volt water pump, a continuous flow water heater, which is also 12-volt, and all the piping it's going to take to do toilet, your shower, and your sink.
On this segment, we're going to talk about plumbing and the many different varieties of supplies you're going to come in contact with and demystify that a little bit.
Art, one of the most important parts about plumbing is to think that you need to have a line to supply the water and a line to carry it away. So there's two different sides of the house when you're dealing with plumbing.
Exactly. And plumbing is one of the fun things you're going to do in your tiny house because it's really easy. If you make a mistake, it's easily correctable. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get some water in your face or on the floor.
That's true. So over here we have some PEX, and this is one of the best types of material that we recommend for using in your tiny house. It's flexible, it resists freezing, and it's also pretty easy to go together, and the fittings aren't very expensive.
Yes, I've heard that if it can totally freeze and expand to 2 or 3 times its normal size without bursting, and that's a nice thing to have if you're going to have the possibility of your pipes freezing.
Don't want to wear waders in your house.
No. And it makes it easy as well because it comes color-coded if you'd like. There's white or opaque that you can use for your entire lines if you prefer, but it's also color-coded so you can keep your hot and cold lines separate. This makes it easy when you get downstream and you're trying to figure out which one goes on the left, which one goes on the right.
Or if you want to make a change later because you're going to be so well versed in your plumbing skills, it'll make it easy to identify if you want to add another fixture at some point.
Yes. Now let's talk about some of the ways to connect the PEX fitting. The PEX is quite flexible, and on long sweeping bends, you don't need a fitting at all. You can bend it up to 45 degrees, maybe even a little tighter if you have a long radius. But if you bend it too tightly, you can get a kink in the line, and that won't be good. So they make fittings in different shapes and sizes. This would be called an L or an elbow.
I've heard them called 90s as well.
90s, referring to the 90-degree bend. And there's 2 ways you can connect these PEX fittings, basically by the type of crimp ring used. They are these brass or some type of copper brass combination material rings that are solid, and there's also a stainless steel pinch ring. Now, depending on what type of rings you choose will determine what type of crimper you use for the fittings. So an example of how to put one of these fittings on, we are going to use the ring crimper today. You would slide, well, let's talk about cutting it first, I guess. You're very seldom going to have it the right length. This is a tool used to cut PEX tubing. It's important to have a cutter to make a nice, clean cut that's square without any burrs on it.
So I just learned something interesting about these cutters. We have an expert plumber on our staff, and one of the things that they were saying to me is that when you're making this cut, if you just mash down on that, you're actually going to pinch the line and make it not quite circular anymore. So one of the things that you want to do is when you're making a cut, you want to kind of rock the tool back and forth, kind of just like this, and then it doesn't, you know, smush down that circle and make it kind of oval. And now you can see we have no burrs on there, and it's a very flat, smooth, perfectly 90-degree cut to the piping itself.
That will make it easy to determine if you have a good fit on your PEX as well. I've also noticed on this tool, it actually has a little reaming tip that if you do have a burr, you can kind of get that out with the end of the tool.
Oh, that's handy.
Very clever. Now, so to put the fitting on, the first thing you'll want to do is put your lock ring on.
All right, so we're going to get that lock ring on there. Then we're going to take our fitting and we're going to push it in just like that. Now we want to get it kind of lined up.
Now it does have a shoulder on it, so you should push it all the way till it bottoms out on the shoulder.
But then when you position the crimp ring, you don't want it all the way up against the edge like that. You want to make sure it's back a little bit and firmly seated, kind of centered on the fitting right there. You see how there's a couple of ribs? The goal is to get the crimp ring to mash the piping kind of around those ribs, and that'll give you a nice tight seal.
Good. Now, the crimper we're going to be using today, again, is the ring crimp, and this particular model has a slot for 3/4 inch tubing and 1/2 inch. So, Meg, if you'll hold that for me, we'll put a crimp on that thing. So, we've lined up the crimp tool, and we're going to make our first crimp till it clicks. You want to squeeze it until you hear that pop.
What we were showing is that you want to get it well seated up against there. You want to have a little gap, and you want to see that the crimp ring right there is actually biting into the, you can see that it's kind of biting into the pipe. So with your PEX tool, you'll often get one of these, or you can buy them separately at the store. But what you'll want to do is find the notch that is connected to the same diameter as what we're using. So this slot here happens to say 1/2 inch go. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to look and you'll want to slide that fitting all the way in. And if it seats, then it's a go.
So what that's telling us is that the ring has compressed enough to be tight, because if you don't compress the rings, they don't fit in there.
That's correct.
Very nice. This is a nice little test. You also want to test just to make sure the ring looks like it's square to the pipe. If it's at an angle, you might have some trouble. Now, don't be too concerned if these fittings don't feel as tight as you think, particularly if you have a joint. They're typically going to be really well sealed because the ring covers the entire ferrule part of the fitting. So, and then you would just continue from here. You would measure your next piece of PEX, cut it to length, and make another crimp. Like I said, this part of the plumbing is really fun. And don't be too concerned if you mess up. They do make a cutter to remove these rings if you have to remove this fitting, and you can recut the tubing, use the same fitting over and over. The fittings are reusable, the rings will not be. Once you cut that ring off, it's going to be garbage. So it's a good idea to practice. Cut some small pieces, make some crimps before you're making that critical crimp under the counter or someplace where it's going to be difficult to repair.
So there's another type of fitting. Let's talk about this one for a minute. This one happens to be both a reducer and a splitter.
Good. So obviously, if you have a water line coming in and you're going to be splitting it off into hot and cold in different areas, you're going to need a larger supply than you will go into each individual fixture. So that's where this reducer fitting would come in. You might come in with 3/4 inch supply
And come out with 1/2 inch on both sides. So a situation where you might find this particular fitting is as the line is coming in, then you'll split it into 2 1/2 inch, and one of these lines would head to your water heater, and then that would eventually become your hot water line, your hot water supply to all of your fixtures. And the other one might just continue on. You might want to even just put blue pipe right here. That would signify that this is now a blue cold water line going to all your fixtures.
Yes, and if you have more than one place that water line is running, you'd employ a T. Your water supply comes in, and you can branch it off to 2 different fixtures.
So here we have a T that has a 3/4 inch diameter to 2 1/2, and this one is just 1/2 all the way around.
All the way around. Yeah. Other fittings that you're going to be needing in your plumbing are shutoff valves. This is a high quality one. It's called a ball valve, and instead of opening it like a faucet with several turns, it's just a 1/4 turn lever. Very secure, very solid. PEX on both ends.
Yeah, and the thing I like about ball valves is that over time, as the water corrodes the fitting, you're actually on the hose type fittings, you're actually spinning something and you're twisting something down into there to cut off the line. And all of those moving parts can get corroded over time. Yes. In the ball valve, it's actually a cylindrical piece of metal that has a hole bored through it. So when it's in its open position, the ball is twisted and that line is open through the middle of that piece. When it's closed, all you're doing, simple rotation, and you're cutting off that line. These I've found in older houses are a lot easier. So over time, it's very worthwhile the investment to get this ball type valve.
Yes, it's a little more expensive, but it's worth it. And then other fittings you might run into, Meg, these are in case you're attaching your PEX fitting to a mechanical unit, say your water heater or filter, and it has a threaded outlet, you can use one of two or several different types. This would be what's called a female adapter. It takes the PEX tubing and converts it to a threaded female adapter. They also make it for the opposite.
This would be the male kind.
If you had to thread this into your water tank and then connect PEX onto it.
Right. So you're fitting like this. You have your cold water coming in to your hot water heater, and then as you're coming out of the hot water heater, you would switch at that point to red to indicate that hot water is leaving that unit.
Yes, and these are just the basic fittings. There's a dizzying array if you go to your plumbing shop. You're going to have to kind of have an idea of what you need before you go there, or it's a bit overwhelming.
It's a good idea, I found, to draw out a diagram.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting fitting you've got there, Meg. That's called the shark bite fitting. Now, these fittings are a bit pricier than these. The advantage is you don't need any tools to put the joint together. It's just a simple push it in, and it locks, and it's watertight, and it's good to go. The disadvantage, like we said, is this fitting is probably 3 or 4 times as much as a simple crimp fitting. You don't need the tools. The advantage is you can take it apart if you need to.
Yeah.
If you've discovered that you've done it wrong, they do make a tool to do this, but I've found with my fingernails, if you'll grab that pipe, Meg, I can depress this ring and you can
slides
remove
right
the
out.
pipe. It almost seems too easy, but they do work quite well.
So I would say for the DIYer, if you have very little experience with plumbing, this might be the easiest way to go. You know, it's just that you seat it in there real firmly and you know that it's connected.
Yes.
However, longevity-wise and in terms of cost, if you feel comfortable using the PEX, it's also a very good way to go.
It's going to be cheaper. Now, another advantage you might find with these is if you have a place that's really difficult to get to, that you can't get back there with these crimp rings, that would be a nice fitting to use. Also, if you have a temporary connection, you're not sure it's going to stay there, you may want to redo it, that would make it easy to undo and redo later.
So it is okay to mix PEX with shark bite.
Absolutely. They work together.
All right.
One other thing you'll need when you're doing your plumbing is a way to secure your lines to the studs or to the walls, and they make these little plastic clips with a nail through it that snaps onto the PEX, and it would just nail right into whatever surface you're trying to attach it. Makes for a nice clean installation. You keep your pipes where they should be and out of the way of potential damage from nails and other protrusions into your walls. So that's about it for supply lines. Now, how you design your system will determine how much piping you need and what types. But that's going to be the fun part. Have fun with that. That's like Tinker Toys for adults. Meg, what I like about plumbing is the rules are simple. There's only 3. First thing is everything rolls downhill.
Just like in the office.
Yes. Hot on the left. And the third one is don't bite your fingernails. So let's talk a little bit about waste disposal or getting rid of the waste.
Yeah, and there's many different fittings that you can use. For example, this one's called a Y, and it's used to combine 2 lines into one.
We also have a T, a little bit different shape. Comes out at a different angle.
Same concept, right?
Same concept. Elbows change the direction, and this would be a 90 degree. And then a 45 degree. And the plumbing fixtures you're going to use, this is again waste disposal or drain line, comes in many different shapes and sizes to accommodate your needs. Now when you put it together, we're going to use a glue.
And this is actually an interesting set here. You might want to look for this when you're shopping for your supplies. It comes as a combo. It's got the primer, which is this purple box, and it's got this glue. And you're going to need both, whether you buy them in a container together or whether you buy them separately.
Yes. Now, before you start gluing them together, it's important to cut out all your pieces and dry fit it. You can basically stick them together like they need to be and assemble your structure to make sure you've got it right before you glue it.
And that's a good time to test and make sure that you have enough slope. It's about 1/8 of an inch per foot is what you're going to look for.
Downhill.
So that everything rolls downhill.
Yeah. Now, once you glue these together, these fittings are not going to be reusable. You may be able to cut the pipe and add a union, but then you get into some trouble. So make sure you have a good dry fit, and then the procedure to glue them is quite simple.
Yeah, and in these containers, When you open them, they're going to smell quite toxic, so please use this in only a ventilated, well-ventilated area.
If you're in your tiny house, it'd be a good idea to employ a fan to get some airflow in there.
Right. And the other thing about these glues is that they come with a little brush inside the can. And that helps you with, putting this actually on your fittings and on your pipe.
Now that dark purple one is the primer, correct?
It is.
All right, so you'll get a little primer on the
Now we're gonna apply the primer to the outside of the pipe because it's gonna fit inside of the fitting. So it's outside of the pipe and inside of the fitting in this particular case. So now we've got the primer on there. And
That's a good job, Meg. I usually come out of this with purple fingers when I'm done.
And now, a little bit of a sticky lid. This is the glue. Makes sense that it's sticky. And you can see this is a little more viscous than the other one. The other one was a little bit runny. This one's a little bit more thick. And we're gonna wanna get a good coat of it on there. We're gonna go all the way around. Then we're gonna get a good coat. Might wanna reload here. Get a
Now you've got about half a minute, maybe, probably less. To put it together, you're going to push it until it stops and then give it about a quarter turn. That quarter turn ensures that you don't have any valleys or gaps in the glue.
And it seats it real well in the bottom of the fitting.
And when it's all, if you've got a good coat in there, you will see that coat of glue oozing out of the union there just slightly.
It's a good idea to have some rags on hand. Maybe you can wipe that off a little bit, make sure it doesn't drip on your face if you're working above your head. Or
Yes, and I can smell this from here. So we would need a fan in here before too long. So that's about it for wastewater disposal. One of the things I was not willing to give up in my tiny home was a hot shower. To get hot water, you'll need to choose a heater. The old-fashioned standard type is a tanked water heater. It contains a tank inside this structure, and the water is constantly kept at a temperature that you set.
the other kind is to use a tankless water heater, also sometimes referred to as on demand. Now, the major difference is that a water heater in the traditional sense has that reservoir and it's constantly using energy to keep that reservoir of water at temperature. A tankless water heater actually uses less energy because it heats the water as you need it. So when you turn on the tap, there's a slight delay and then the water is warm. And that's actually heating as you turn on the water.
It's a bit more efficient.
It is.
Now, both of these are electric models. You can get either one of these in a gas or propane model. Whichever model you choose is going to determine the installation as far as for wiring and venting.
The other thing that you'll want to keep in mind is sizing the hot water heater for the type of use that you'll be using. In a tiny home, you happen to not have very many fixtures. Especially in the shower, new federal regulations require that shower heads be using less than 2.5 gallons per minute. This tankless water heater happens to be one that heats exactly 2.5 gallons per minute. So it would be fine for your hot shower, Art.
That's a good point. That's how they're rated. This model would be rated by gallons, and that is storage. How many gallons is storage? And the on-demands are rated by how many gallons per minute they can produce. Well, that's it for hot water. And now for the scoop on poop. Toilets for your tiny home can come in a variety of sizes, shapes, and methods of disposal. The three most common are going to be an RV, a low-flow water, and a standard residential toilet. All three of those models require water to flush the waste into either a holding tank, a sewage system, or a septic tank. This model is for an RV, has a standard type lid, and a little lever to actually flush the toilet and dispose of the waste. Some of our customers have found that going with a composting type toilet is a lot simpler and fits their lifestyle a little better. With a composting toilet, you don't need water hookups for the toilet. You don't need a sewer hookup for the toilet. There's no black water created. So you don't have some issues to deal with there. Makes the installation a little bit easier. I have a composting toilet in my home that's made by a company called Nature's Head. And the composting toilets come in two basic varieties. One is just the liquids and solids go into the container and usually requires some type of heat source to evaporate the liquids to control the smell and to aid in the decomposition. The more advanced type will separate the liquids and solids just by a simple diverter mechanism. In those types, you will empty the liquids quite frequently, but the solids are captive in a container that actually decomposes the solids. You usually seed them with hydrated peat moss or coconut husks or some type of medium that aids in that digestive process.